And we're back. This is Stu.
This is Jay.
This is Riders of the Dawn. And today we are going to talk about science fiction.
Yes. So science fiction is something that Stu and I have written quite a bit of.
Yeah, we designed Deep Time together, and so you can go look at my book, Prophet of the Godseed, on Amazon. That's from a science fiction IP or universe that we designed together, although I wrote the book by myself.
Yeah, and we're also avid science fiction consumers. So you heard, if you've been listening to the podcast, we've talked about Star Trek and Star Wars, and I mentioned the Expanse series. There's just tons of sci-fi out there that is great to read, but if you're writing science fiction, there's some things you need to be aware of. One of those things especially is building the world, because when you're working in science fiction, you're building a world that is different from a world that you would build if you were, say, working in high fantasy.
Yeah, but I think the approaches are somewhat the same.
Absolutely.
The thing when you're constructing your sci-fi setting is you want to let the reader know what the constraints of the world are, like how the limitations of your science fiction work are different from everyday life.
And in this case, instead of it, the constrictions being different because of magic, it's because of technology.
Yeah, and in some cases, there's I don't even remember who said it now. I feel bad about it, but any sufficiently developed technology is indistinguishable from magic.
From magic, yeah.
He said, speaking into a small box, driving a car powered by crushed dinosaur juice, preparing to beam his information all over the globe for people to listen to at their convenience.
Yeah. So
maybe someone will listen to this in 50 years.
Yeah. So this is, it's true that anything that we have done today to someone from 1,000 years ago would seem like magic, or shoot, even 100 years ago it seemed like magic, frankly. So when you're talking about science fiction and you're building your technology, you can think about it like a sort of magic. And this is something that I've noticed in my sci-fi writing and listening to my readers who talk about it, is that there are certain techniques in science fiction where when you talk about something, the reader wants to know what it is, but at the same time you don't want to crush them with the details.
Yeah, So this is a criticism of Prophet of the Godseed that I got from a lot of readers who don't read sci-fi right? Mm-hmm. Is that they're like, I don't understand. They didn't understand the concept of time dilation.
Right.
This was like a pretty early on criticism, and I was like, well, I guess I didn't assume a readership that didn't understand like the general theory of relativity. It's a 100-year-old theory, right?
Right.
It's old news, but it's not something that people are taught that much. Yeah. It's something that you have to sort of gather in more advanced studies in physics, or just through more advanced studies in cosmology. You tend to not get that. So then the quest is, how do I explain this scientific concept that has this big impact on the world and the story without beating the reader over the head with it, without stopping and taking a paragraph and saying, you see, as you
Einstein went
when you approach the speed of light, that's the basic part. When you approach the speed of light, time slows down, and it gets slower and slower until when you reach the speed of light, time stands still. So that makes it so that when the characters are traveling through space, from their perspective, time is passing normally, but from an external perspective, their time is passing extremely slowly. So that a journey of 1,000 light years, obviously it takes them close to or a little bit over 1,000 years to go, because they're traveling near the speed of light. But from their perspective, the journey may only take, a month or two. Yeah. Right? So a month or two passes for them. That's not an insubstantial amount of time from their perspective, but in the process, 1,000 years has transpired outward, and that's the basis of the story. So how do I explain that to a reader without doing what I just did?
Well, and this is kind of why I think a lot of times it's good to explain your science as magic, because the readers aren't going to necessarily understand that. Now, there are certain cases that I think it's appropriate to not think your audience is stupid. And this is where I got a lot of the same criticism when I was writing short stories about Deep Time, is that you write about the science as you know about it, and you hope that the reader gets it, because what you need to do is, through the narrative, you say what's happening, and then even if the reader doesn't understand that specific thing, they can infer what it is through the action that is happening.
Yeah, and that's why a character like Moses is useful, because he's sort of Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court in a sci-fi setting, in that he has to have things explained to him stupidly because he knows literally nothing.
Yeah.
So for him, he needs like a lot of explanation of things, and so you have an opportunity to maybe explain little bits. Or also in Prophet of the God Seed, I have Padalmo conveniently who doesn't understand it either, so he gets a little bit of the explanation, which in turn gives the reader the information that they want to understand what's happening in the story.
So I think this leads us into a really great topic, which is distinguishing your story from something that would be considered hard sci-fi or something that would be a space opera.
Yeah, space opera, quote, soft sci-fi.
So if you look at Star Wars as a space opera, it's basically space fantasy.
Yeah.
There's not anything in it that would be considered science fiction. There's no science talked about. It's just like, there's a space station and it shoots lasers and destroys planets. And we have these swords that
we travel through hyperspace. The hyperspace isn't a thing, guys.
Yeah. Yeah. But then you compare that with
just Star Trek.
Well, Star Trek is still a lot of space opera, but it's much harder than Star Wars. I'm thinking like Hyperion. Hyperion is a really good, closer to hard sci-fi. And if you haven't checked that out, it's
by Dan Simmons.
Yeah, it's such a great series of books. It's 4 books: Hyperion, Fall of Hyperion, Endymion, and Rise of Endymion. And this was, I think, really influential to me writing sci-fi, because it talks about relativity, and it kind of skirts it finds ways around it, but then it destroys those ways around it, which makes it harder for the people who are accustomed to kind of traveling at their ease, to live in the world that they live in. So that's something that's more hard sci-fi. It's where the laws that govern our world also govern that world. That's a big thing.
Yeah, we don't come up with, like in Star Wars, traveling faster than the speed of light is essentially magic. It's never explained, at least not in the main canon of movies. I haven't read all the EU, so I don't know if they try to explain it too scientifically.
Right.
That spaceships are kind of a sci-fi element, but they don't. They have this thing called hyperdrive that allows them to travel faster than the speed of light, and we don't even know how much faster than the speed of light. Versus Star Trek, they have they have warp 10, and you can actually, nerds will actually know how fast warp 10 is, because it takes, like if you look at Star Trek Voyager, they find themselves in the Delta Quadrant.
Right.
They're literally on the other side of the galaxy. Galaxy's 110,000 light years across, guys. And they figure out it's going to take them something like 70 years to travel through the galaxy back home at like their maximum speed.
Yeah.
So clearly there's some real constraints to the speed at which people can travel in Star Trek, even though they're traveling faster than light. In Star Wars, you never bother with that. It's like, we got to go to Alderaan, so we're going to travel for a couple hours to Alderaan. We don't know how far away Alderaan is, and then you're there, and then it's destroyed, and then you're so you just never have those sorts of specifics are ever entered into Star Wars.
Or you're standing on a planet solar systems away, and you watch another group of planets be destroyed without a telescope.
During daylight. Yeah, so at a certain point, that was Force Awakens. At a certain point, like, it can be too much. But also, the thing is that those things are not important for the story, because how far away something is from something else hasn't affected or hasn't been a big part of the Star Wars story. It hasn't been necessary to understand the narrative. And this is where I get into what makes sci-fi is that you have technology that affects people in a way that causes the story to be different from how it would be if that technology didn't exist.
Right.
That to me is what makes sci-fi, and that's especially what makes hard sci-fi. The focus should be on the story, but the story isn't a normal story that exists in a different atmosphere. The story should be different, otherwise there's no reason to write sci-fi. Like, the technology should be affecting the characters in the story.
And we've talked a lot about spaceships, but a lot of, cyberpunk is sci-fi, where you're talking about these implants that alter how people interact with the world. And a lot of times it's like a dystopian future where they're not traveling through space; they're living in a tropey sense. They're living in like corporate ruled Earth.
Oh yeah.
With with these implants. What's the movie I'm thinking of with Keanu Reeves?
Oh, Johnny Mnemonic.
Johnny Mnemonic.
With Ice-T and Henry Rollins in it.
Yeah, classic dystopian cyberpunk.
Yeah, there were good elements to Johnny Mnemonic, but we should just do a podcast on Johnny.
Just on Johnny Mnemonic. We should actually do a movie review of that. That would be fun.
Yeah, I think that would be a fun one.
Science fiction. I think Stu hit the nail on the head. It's the fiction part is with the science. So this is really important for you if you're writing science fiction. It is important if you're going to talk about existing scientific theories that you understand them and you can research them and learn about them as much as you need for the story, and then make the fiction on top of that. That would make a good hard sci-fi. Whereas if you're going to make up science, this is still science fiction. That you world build that science yourself. So if you're going to suddenly we make computers advanced enough that we realize, we create internal networking that doesn't require networking cards, and we realize that there's a space in our brain for networking, and we start tapping into that networking, and suddenly humanity becomes a hive mind. That's an example of made up. It's science fiction, right?
But the story should be about how that concept then affects the people.
Yeah, so you're world building that fiction. Whereas in Star Wars, you have midichlorians and the Force and something else. So that's made up science. That's fictional science. It's where the fiction and science fiction comes from. I think that my version would be a little harder sci-fi, but
yeah, I
think it would be fun.
Yeah, I think it's really about what elements you want to put in the story that are then going to be the big conflict elements and the big sort of boundary and the channels for which your narrative is going to go down. In Star Wars, it's all about the Force and these sort of ideas about morality. In Star Trek, it's much more about people and cultures, generally. But there's, obviously Star Trek's huge. In many ways, it's really bigger, a lot bigger than Star Wars, in terms of the size of its universe and how much is there, and how much depth is there. Because there's been, how many series have there been? There's been a bunch of series. So there's just more time to explore those things. Yeah, and books. And Star Wars also has books, but Star Trek has the books as well. So it's been, it depends what you want your story to focus on. I think the most important element, every story needs a conflict. So whatever piece of science or science fiction you're putting in to be sort of the central theme of the book, that also should probably generate the kind of conflicts that you are wanting to explore in your narrative. So if it's a hive mind thing, what's the conflict? Well, the conflict is, what about the people who aren't in the hive mind and who are off doing their own thing? What about them trying to be put into the hive mind, or them? How are they different from the people who are chapped into the network? And you know, is there a love story between people that are in these two different categories of person?
Yeah. Or how does people inside of a hive mind reproduce? Is it just mechanically, or is there this emotional love? I mean, there's lots of cool things you could talk about.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff you can explore. And a writer that I think, this is a classic sci-fi writer, is Robert Heinlein, who did Starship Troopers, who did, what is it, Moon is a Cruel Mistress? I think that's the one I'm thinking of. I think I gave the wrong title for it. It's been a while since I read it. Also, Stranger in a Strange Land. And what he really attacked in every single book was the ideas. So his books are really, really strongly about the ideas. He wrote this book about this moon colony that, basically rebels from Earth. And on that moon colony, there's like this excess of men and there's a shortage of women. And so their culture adapts to that by having multiple men married to one woman. So they have a polygamous, but on the opposite of how we usually have it, as a reaction to those limitations. And so all the stuff in the setting is a reaction to whatever scientific limitations or whatever that you happen to be putting into the book. And that in turn affects the viewpoint of the characters, and then creates the conflict with other characters who are experiencing something different. All those things are really what's going to create the interest in a sci-fi book. And I'm talking here a lot about what people tend to call genre science fiction, as opposed to softer science fiction, or something that has a sci-fi element but isn't really in the sci-fi genre because it doesn't have the technology creating an effect in the story.
Yeah. Well, what I'm thinking about also Isaac Asimov, who talked a lot about robotics. He's the guy who first wrote about these rules of robotics, where one of the rules is that a robot can't do harm to humans. And what's interesting is there's a lot of things in science fiction that people read about and they think, man, that is so cool, I wish we had that in real life. And then people start trying to figure out how to do that in real life. So this is something that I think is really important about science fiction, because it can create the desire for research and development.
Yeah, I think that's you might be listening to this on your phone, and there was this point where people realized that about 2005, as they flipped open their phone, that they were using a Star Trek communicator from the 1960s.
Yeah,
where it's like, oh my god, not just the function of it, but the aesthetic design of it was now from Star Trek. So think about how visionary Star Trek was. And the question is did Star Trek accurately predict where we were going, or was it that people were inspired by Star Trek, at least for part of that design and part of that idea, to create what we have? And it's hard to say which one's which. I think, here's one of the things that you can do if you're building a science fiction, when you're trying to think of the future. The easiest thing to do is to imagine whatever technology we have, but make it badass. Mm-hmm. Make it like the next evolution of it that's really cool. And chances are you'll be actually writing about the future. Versus what some people tend to do, which is to try to think about our technology as it is, and then something else is added to it. Right. Cars haven't changed that much in the last 30 years, but they've changed a lot in 100 years. And even in the last 30 years, they're faster, they're better, they're more efficient. They have crazy radios in them. Self-driving cars exist.
Yeah, they're a thing now.
They are a thing, so they're probably going to be a thing in the future. When I watched Demolition Man, which was a Sylvester Stallone movie, a comedy action movie from the 1990s, they actually predicted a lot of things kind of accurately. Like they had these self-driving cars, and you could turn on self-drive and you could turn off self-drive. And they had the safety mechanism of the cars, and it filled it up with styrofoam to like completely pad you from an impact.
Yeah.
It was like, what a cool idea. So I think the filmmakers were thinking a lot along the lines of like, well, what would be the next badass thing if we were going to design, something in the future? What would be the next version of what we have?
Yeah.
And you get a pretty. And then there was also magic in it. Like the little freeze ball that froze everything. It's like, what is like? Is that a? It's like, oh, here's some stuff. Here's some plasma, or not plasma. Here's some hydrogen at absolute zero, and it just freezes everything. Like, what is that thing?
Yeah.
There's nothing that small that's also going to be cold enough to freeze the entire room.
Also, I mean, that would mean that like somehow cryogenics works.
Yeah, cryogenics works.
Yeah.
And it worked in the 1990s.
Yeah. So this is, I think science fiction is such a rich genre, and it's a genre that will always be, because no matter how advanced we get, the human imagination is limitless.
Yeah.
So writing in science fiction, you're in a lot of cases pioneering your story, but you're forward thinking, and you're pioneering the world around you too. You're imagining the world that we could be living in.
Yeah, you're imagining like one possible future in a lot of senses, and that's a really, really cool thing to think about. There is like genre bending science fiction out there that's like cowboys and aliens. It's not really genre science fiction, That's just kind of a mashup, or maybe like a postmodern attack of it. There's time travel stuff too. Mm-hmm. Time travel maybe is something that needs its own.
Yeah, time travel is its own. Like, it exists a lot in science fiction, but it also exists everywhere. We see it in fantasy even. Because time travel is just one of those things that I think fascinates the human mind, and so it finds its way into everything.
Yeah, I don't know if there's too much else to say about science fiction. Any closing remarks?
Don't worry about your research so much. Write your story. You can backfill your research. That's a problem that I have. I always want to make sure that my research is perfect, but guess what? I'm not an engineer. I'm a teacher.
Yeah.
So
to follow up on that advice, I'd say make sure that you research the stuff that's essential for your story to function.
Yeah.
If there's some distance that someone has to travel, make sure that you have like an accurate representation of that. But you don't need to. You don't need to like. I don't know. You don't need to study like black hole field mechanics or something if you're writing a story that doesn't involve that at all.
Also, a parsec is a unit of distance, not a measurement of time.
Yeah, parsec is technically 1 arc second of parallax travel. Okay, we'll explain that some other time. Right? Because it's, we think of it as a term of distance, but you're actually measuring the movement of a star in the sky. That's a parsec.
So anyway, this has been Riders of the Dawn. Thanks so much for listening. I'm Jay. You can
Yeah, go ahead.
You can find me at MatthewJWellman.com.
This is Stu. You can find me at davidvstewart.com and dvspress.com. You can email the show at stu at davidvstewart.com.
And do we have a YouTube channel now?
It's not up yet. We'll have it soon. It'll probably be youtube.com/Riders of the Dawn. When we get it up, you guys
You'll hear all about it.
Yeah.
All right, thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you tomorrow.
All right, this has been Riders of the Dawn.